The Kradox soldiers screamed in terror as their plasma bolts sizzled uselessly against the human skin, their most powerful weapons proving utterly ineffective against Earth's greatest warrior. Ethan Russell sat hunched over the bar in a dimly lit dive on Rigel Station, the stench of stale booze and the chatter of a dozen alien languages filling his nostrils and ears. He stared into his glass of Thaxirian whiskey, the liquid's eerie glow casting distorted reflections on his rugged face. Ethan downed the drink in one burning gulp, trying to wash away the bitter taste of failure that had haunted him since his last mission gone wrong. A mission that got his squad killed. Friends he'd fought beside for years, all gone in a hail of plasma fire because of him. A figure slid into the booth across from Ethan. He looked up to see a tall, thin alien with mottled green skin and multifaceted eyes that glittered in the low light. The creature folded its long-fingered hands on the table. "Ethan Russell," it said, its voice a sibilant whisper. "I am Murloc. I represent the Una's Dominion. We have a job for you." Ethan's lip curled. He'd had enough of jobs, enough of watching good soldiers die. Not interested. "We are prepared to pay handsomely, 10 million credits. Murloc leaned forward, its eyes intense. "The survival of my entire species is at stake. We are losing a war against the Kradox, an enemy far superior to us in technology and numbers, but we have been watching you humans. You have a genetic quirk, a mutation that makes you seemingly invincible to Kradox weapons. Infiltrate the Kradox homeworld, assassinate their emperor. It will give us a chance to strike back, to have some hope of survival. Without you, we will be annihilated." Ethan considered. The money was tempting, but even more than that, he felt the old urge rising inside him, the need to fight, to protect. The Unas were on the verge of extinction. He couldn't just sit back and let that happen. "Not again." "Looks like you've got yourself a merc," Ethan said, rising from the booth. "Let's go kill an emperor." "One condition," Ethan said, holding up a finger. "I work alone, no Unas backup." Ethan pocketed the chip and stood, his chair scraping against the floor. He turned and strode out of the bar, his boots thudding on the metal grating. As he stepped into the neon-lit alley outside, a figure lurked in the shadows, unseen. The Kradox spy raised a device, snapping a picture of Ethan's face. The image was instantly transmitted, racing across the stars to the Kradox homeworld. On his ship, Ethan stood in his armory, the walls lined with gleaming weapons. He loaded his customized plasma rifle, checked the edge on his monofilament combat knife, and packed a bandolier of plasma grenades. He slotted the data chip into his console, scanning the information. A detailed schematic of the Kradox Imperial Palace flashed up, along with the Emperor's meticulously tracked schedule. One file caught his eye, a report on a new Kradox weapon, something codenamed the Nullifier. Details were scarce, but it seemed the Kradox had found a way to counteract the human genetic advantage. Ethan frowned. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of unease. Ethan fired up his ship's engines, setting a course for Kradox space. He leaned back in his pilot's chair as the stars blurred into streaks of light. It would be a long journey through lawless territory. He closed his eyes, trying to snatch some rest. A proximity alert jolted him awake. He checked the scanner, a squadron of Kradox fighters closing fast. His comm crackled to life. "Human vessel, this is Kradox Patrol Sigma 9. You are trespassing in our sovereign space. Surrender immediately or be destroyed." Ethan's lips curled into a cold smile. "Try to take me, lizard boys." He punched his thrusters to full, the inertia slamming him back into his seat as his ship leapt forward. The fighters opened fire, lances of searing light slashing past his cockpit. Ethan juked and jinked, his fingers flying across the controls. He swung his ship around, spitting a burst of plasma that vaporized the lead fighter. The remaining Kradox ships swarmed him, peppering his shields with laser blasts. Alarms blared as his defenses steadily drained. Ethan gritted his teeth, fighting with every ounce of his skill. He took out another fighter with a well-placed torpedo, but there were too many. A shot slipped through, slamming into his aft section, engines screaming, Ethan's ship spiraled out of control towards a nearby planet. Ethan fought with the controls, trying to level out. At the last second, he managed to pull up, his ship ploughing a furrow of molten earth as it skidded to a halt on the outskirts of a sprawling Kradox base. Soldiers in black armor surrounded his downed vessel, weapons raised. Ethan grabbed his rifle and crouched behind a bulkhead, sighting down the barrel. As the first Kradox stormed up his ramp, Ethan drilled a shot straight through his helmet. He dropped, but more charged in behind. Ethan fired methodically, downing Kradox with headshots as they tried to rush him. But as he turned to face a new attacker, a bolt of crackling blue energy slammed into his shoulder. Ethan gasped, feeling an unfamiliar sensation. Pain. He glanced down to see blood welling from a charred hole in his armor. The Kradox had weapons that could hurt him now. The game had changed. Ethan primed the self-destruct sequence on his ship and sprinted for the exit, plasma bolts whizzing past his head. He stumbled down the ramp, clutching his wounded arm, and slipped into the shadows of the base, just as his ship exploded in a ball of white fire. Sirens howled as Kradox soldiers swarmed like ants from their barracks, searching for the intruder. Ethan skulked through the alleys between buildings, leaving a trail of blood, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The pain was excruciating, but he forced himself on. He had to find a way off this rock, steal a ship, complete his mission. The base sirens howled as Ethan slipped into the darkened hangar, his stolen uniform sticking to his skin with sweat and blood. He crept between the parked fighters, pausing at each ship to assess it. Too large, too slow, too damaged. There. A sleek interceptor, compact and fast. Perfect for a quick getaway. Perfect for... Ethan clambered into the cockpit, his fingers flying over the unfamiliar controls. The engines hummed to life just as the hangar doors burst open, Kradox soldiers pouring in. Laser blasts hammered the fighter's hull as Ethan punched the throttle, the sudden acceleration slamming him back into the seat. He shot out of the hangar into the night sky, immediately banking hard to avoid the base's defense turrets. Lances of energy sizzled past his canopy, one bolt scoring a molten line across his wing. Ethan jinked and rolled, pushing the fighter to its limits as he tried to evade the relentless fire. Ethan hit the ground hard, pain lancing through his already battered body. He dragged himself away from the burning wreckage, his blood staining the dirt. In the distance, he could hear the shouts of Kradox soldiers, see the beams of their searchlights sweeping the crash site. They were closing in. But the shot never came. Instead, there was a strange humming noise, and a feeling like static electricity prickling his skin. Ethan's eyes snapped open to see a shimmering in the air above him, a ship decloaking. A beam of light engulfed him, and suddenly he was... elsewhere. Ethan found himself on the deck of an unfamiliar ship, sleek and high-tech. He struggled to his feet, reaching for a weapon that wasn't there. The voice was female, with a slight accent that Ethan couldn't quite place. He turned to see a striking woman with short red hair, dressed in a form-fitting black suit. She held up her hands in a placating gesture. "Who the hell are you?" Ethan demanded. "Natasha Romanoff, Earth Intelligence Service." She tossed him a medkit. "Patch yourself up, we need to talk." As Ethan tended to his wounds, Natasha explained the situation. Earth had been watching the Unas-Kradox conflict closely, and Ethan's involvement had not gone unnoticed. "We can't let you kill the Kradox Emperor," Natasha said bluntly. "It would destabilize the entire region, create a power vacuum that would threaten Earth's interests. The Unas are using you." Natasha leaned forward. "The mission has changed. The Kradox have technology that can hurt you now. We need to get our hands on it, figure out how it works, so we can protect our people. That's more important than any promise to the Unas." Ethan hesitated. The soldier in him rebelled at the thought of abandoning a mission, but Natasha's logic was sound, and if the Kradox could make weapons that could kill humans, that changed everything. "I have an asset inside the Kradox Palace," Natasha continued. "They can get us in. With your skills and my intel, we can steal the tech and get out before anyone knows we were there." There was something else, too. a glint in Natasha's eye that said she knew more than she was letting on. "I know why you left Earth, Ethan. Why you've been running ever since. I can give you a chance to make things right, to find the redemption you've been seeking. But only if you help me now." Ethan's jaw clenched. He'd buried those memories deep, tried to lose himself in the thrill of battle and the blur of the next mission, but they still haunted him in the quiet moments between fights. Maybe it was time to stop running. "All right," he said finally. "I'm in. Let's go steal some Kradox tech." As the ship leapt into warp, Ethan stared out at the blurring stars, his mind racing. Everything had changed. The mission, his purpose, his understanding of himself. He was heading into the heart of enemy territory, to confront a past he'd tried to forget. But for the first time in years he felt a flicker of something he'd thought long dead. Hope. As Natasha's sleek ship sliced through the inky void, Ethan stood hunched over a holographic display, his brow furrowed in concentration. The three-dimensional image of the Kradox Imperial Palace rotated slowly, its intricate architecture laid bare. Natasha pointed to a specific section, her finger passing through the translucent blue light. "Here," she said, her voice tight with focus. "Zorax says this is where they're keeping the anti-human weapon, a secret lab deep in the bowels of the palace." Ethan nodded, committing the layout to memory. "And our way in?" Natasha tapped a few commands, and the image zoomed in on a service entrance. "We'll pose as a Kradox guard escorting a human prisoner. Zorax will meet us here and guide us the rest of the way." Ethan's jaw tightened. The plan was risky, hinging on too many variables, but it was the best they had. As the ship descended towards the Kradox homeworld, Ethan and Natasha prepared their disguises. Ethan donned a ragged prisoner's jumpsuit, while Natasha slipped into the black armor of a Kradox guard. She tossed Ethan a pair of energy cuffs, which he snapped around his wrists. The ship touched down on the outskirts of the capital city, kicking up a cloud of red dust. Ethan and Natasha emerged, Natasha gripping Ethan's arm roughly, playing her part. They made their way through the winding streets, the oppressive heat bearing down on them. At the rendezvous point, a shadowed alley, they found only silence, no sign of Zorax. Ethan's instinct screamed a warning. Something was wrong. They crept forward, Natasha's hand on her blaster. As they rounded a corner, they stumbled upon a grim sight. Zorax, sprawled on the ground, a smoking hole in his chest. His multifaceted eyes stared sightlessly at the crimson sky. Ethan knelt beside the body, his mind racing. The Kradox must have discovered his betrayal. This whole thing is a trap. No sooner had the words left his mouth than a hail of plasma bolts rained down on their position. Kradox soldiers swarmed from every direction, their weapons spitting deadly energy. Ethan and Natasha reacted instantly, falling into a back-to-back formation. Ethan's cuffs shattered as he flexed his wrists, and he snatched up a fallen Kradox's rifle. The weapon bucked in his hands as he returned fire, each shot finding its mark with unerring precision. Beside him, Natasha was a blur of motion, her agility bordering on the supernatural. She vaulted over a crumbling wall, her blaster spitting rapid bursts that dropped Kradox soldiers like marionettes with their strings cut. But for every Kradox they felled, two more seemed to take their place, and these soldiers were armed with the new weapons, the ones that could pierce even Ethan's invulnerability. A bolt slammed into his shoulder, spinning him around. Another grazed his thigh, drawing a grunt of pain. Just as it seemed they would be overrun, a series of deafening explosions shook the ground. Kradox soldiers were hurled through the air like ragdolls, their armor shattered. Through the smoke and dust, Ethan saw a familiar face. Murloc, flanked by a team of battle-hardened Unas commandos. The Unas leader fired his plasma rifle with one hand, beckoning to Ethan with the other. "Russell," he shouted over the din of battle, "we have to get to the palace now before they can move the weapon." Ethan hesitated, looking to Natasha. This was her mission, her play. But the Kradox were closing in and they were out of options. Natasha met his gaze, her eyes hard. "Go with them," she urged. "I'll catch up. Just get that weapon." Ethan nodded, a strange mix of relief and reluctance washing over him. Part of him yearned to see this through with Natasha, to unravel the secrets she clearly held close. But the soldier in him, the part that had sworn an oath to the Unas, knew where his duty lay. With a final nod to Natasha, Ethan turned and sprinted towards Murloc, diving into the fray with the Unas commandos. Together they carved a path through the Kradox forces, plasma bolts filling the air like a lethal swarm. As they fought their way towards the palace, Ethan risked a glance over his shoulder. But Natasha was gone, vanished into the chaos of the battle. Her motives, her true agenda, remained as opaque as ever. But there was no time to dwell on that now. The palace loomed ahead, and with it the key to ending this war once and for all. Ethan just hoped that whatever they found within those walls, it would be worth the price they had paid to reach it. The palace walls shuddered as Ethan, Murloc, and the Unas commandos blasted their way through the grand entrance. Kradox guards swarmed to meet them, plasma bolts sizzling through the air. Ethan charged forward, his rifle spitting lethal bursts. Kradox soldiers dropped, their armor smoking. But more took their place, pouring fire from balconies and doorways. Ethan and his allies dove for cover behind pillars as the hall became a killing field of crisscrossing energy beams. "We're pinned down," Murloc shouted over the din of battle. "We'll never reach the lab at this rate." Ethan scanned the room, his enhanced senses picking out details. There, a side corridor, less guarded, a potential path. "Murloc," he called, "lay down covering fire. I'm going to make a run for that hallway." Murloc followed his gaze, his multifaceted eyes widening. "It's suicide! There's too many of them!" But Ethan was already moving, a newfound sense of purpose driving him forward. "Just do it." Murloc hesitated for a split second, then nodded. "Covering fire!" he roared to his commandos. The Unas soldiers unleashed a blistering barrage, plasma bolts stitching across the Kradox positions. Under this onslaught, the guards scattered for cover. Ethan seized the moment. He vaulted over his barricade and sprinted for the corridor, his legs pumping. Kradox shots zipped around him, searing the air. But Ethan's invincibility held, the bolts sparking harmlessly off his skin. A group of guards moved to block his path, raising their rifles. Ethan didn't slow. He crashed into them like a human battering ram, sending them flying. His hands blurred in a flurry of strikes, each blow precisely targeted to weak points in Kradox armor. Bones crunched, bodies crumpled. Ethan didn't stop to catch his breath. He leapt over the fallen guards and raced on, the laboratory door now in sight. But as he reached it, he found it sealed by a heavy blast door. He slammed his fist against the unyielding metal in frustration. The voice was cold, mocking. Ethan spun to see the Kradox Emperor himself striding down the corridor, a strange weapon glowing in his clawed hands. The Emperor's elite guard fanned out behind him, their rifles trained on Ethan. "I've been studying you, Ethan Russell," the Emperor hissed. "Your strength, your speed, your invulnerability. Impressive for a primitive species, but everything has a weakness. And I've found yours." He raised the glowing gun and fired. A beam of scintillating energy lanced out, striking Ethan in the chest, and Ethan screamed. It was pain beyond anything he had ever known, beyond anything he thought possible. It felt as if every nerve in his body was being flayed raw, every cell incinerated. He collapsed to his knees, his muscles spasming. Through a haze of agony, he heard the Emperor's gloating laughter. How does it feel, human, to be helpless, powerless? This weapon doesn't just negate your invincibility, it turns it against you, makes you relive every wound, every hurt you've ever suffered, all at once. The Emperor stood over him, savoring his torment. He raised the weapon again, aiming it at Ethan's head. "And now you die, along with the last hope of your pathetic species." Ethan braced for the killing blow, but it never came. Instead, a plasma bolt seared over his head, striking the Emperor square between the eyes. The Kradox ruler toppled, his weapon clattering to the floor. Behind him stood Natasha, her rifle smoking. She rushed to Ethan's side, helping him to his feet as the elite guards stood stunned. "Natasha," Ethan croaked, his body still racked with phantom pain. "I thought—" "I had to make you think I'd left," she said, her voice tight, "so I could infiltrate on my own. I'm sorry, but we've got to move, now." Rows of weapons, armor, devices beyond anything they'd seen. Technology that could reshape the face of the galaxy. They began grabbing schematics, prototypes, data drives, but beyond the door they could hear the sounds of battle intensifying, Murloc and his commandos fighting their way closer. And from the other direction, the ominous tramp of Kradoc's reinforcements. Ethan and Natasha looked at each other, a silent understanding passing between them. They had a choice to make: stand and fight with their allies, or escape with the information that could turn the tide of the war. There was no time to debate. They had to choose. Ethan's fingers flew across the console, his eyes darting between the screens as he downloaded the precious data onto a portable drive. Natasha stood guard at the door, her rifle at the ready, ears straining for the sound of approaching Kradoc soldiers. The lab's door exploded inward with a deafening blast, sending shards of metal flying. Through the smoke, Murloc staggered in, his hand clutching a bloody wound in his side. "Russell," he gasped, his face twisted with pain. "You have to go, now. Get that data to Earth and the Unas. It's our only hope." Ethan shook his head, snatching the drive and pocketing it. "Not without you. I don't leave allies behind." He slung Murloc's arm over his shoulders, supporting the wounded Unas. Natasha took point, leading them out into the smoke-filled corridor. Plasma bolts zipped past their heads as they fought their way through the palace, Ethan half carrying, half dragging Murloc. In the chaos of battle, they lost sight of the Unas commandos. Ethan's heart pounded as they ran, the weight of Murloc's life and the fate of 2 species resting on his shoulders. They burst into a hangar bay, only to find themselves surrounded by a phalanx of Kradoc soldiers, weapons trained on them. Ethan's eyes darted around, seeking an escape. They settled on a sleek Kradoc fighter, its engines humming with power. "There," he said, nodding towards the ship. "Our ticket out of here." They sprinted for the fighter, plasma bolts scorching the ground at their heels. Ethan practically threw Murloc into the rear seat before leaping into the pilot's chair, Natasha sliding into the co-pilot's position. His hands gripped the unfamiliar controls, his mind racing to decipher their function. The ship rocketed out of the hangar, the acceleration pressing them back into their seats. Kradoc's fighters swarmed like angry hornets, their laser cannons spitting deadly light. Ethan wrenched the controls, sending their ship into a dizzying roll. His reflexes, honed by years of combat, guided his movements as he dodged and weaved through the enemy fire. Murloc, despite his wounds, manned the rear guns, his shots precise and deadly. Kradoc's ships exploded in brilliant fireballs, but always more came to take their place. They punched through the atmosphere, the blue sky giving way to the star-studded blackness of space. For a moment, Ethan dared to hope they'd made it. Then proximity alarms blared, and a massive shape filled the view screen. A Kradoc's battleship, its weapons already glowing with deadly charge. "It's been an honor, Russell," Murloc said, his voice strained with pain and something else, resolve. "But this is where I get off." Before Ethan could react, Murloc reached forward, his blood-slicked hand slamming down on the eject controls. Ethan and Natasha's seats shot upward, clear of the ship, just as Murloc sent the fighter hurtling towards the battleship. From the silence of space, Ethan watched in helpless horror as the fighter, with Murloc still inside, rammed the battleship. For a heartbeat, nothing happened. Then a blinding flash of light as both ships vanished in a titanic explosion. Ethan felt numb, even as an Unas ship decloaked and tracted them aboard. He barely registered the Unas commandos, battered but alive, or the medic who checked him over for injuries. All he could see was Murloc's face in that last moment, the calm acceptance in his eyes. As the ship set a course for Earth, the weight of all they'd lost seemed to settle on Ethan's shoulders. But then he felt Natasha's hand on his arm, a gentle pressure that somehow steadied him. Ethan nodded, his jaw set with determination. They had a long fight ahead of them, but for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel alone in it. The Una's ship docked at Earth's orbital station, a gleaming spire rising from the blue-green marble below. Ethan stepped out onto the deck, Natasha at his side, a heavy weight settling in his chest. They'd won, but at what cost? Uniformed officials swarmed them, whisking the precious data drive away for analysis. Ethan barely registered their congratulations, their eager handshakes. All he could see was Murlock's face in that final moment, the calm acceptance in his eyes as he sacrificed himself for the mission. The debriefing passed in a blur of harsh lights and stern faces. Yes, the data was invaluable. Yes, it would change the course of the war, of human history itself. But all Ethan felt was hollow. In the days that followed, he was paraded before cheering crowds, hailed as a hero. But the adulation felt empty. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd failed, that he should have found another way. He was in his quarters, staring blankly at the holographic display of his medal, when the door chimed. It slid open to reveal a tall, broad-shouldered man in the crisp white uniform of an Earth Fleet admiral. He stepped inside, his face grave. "Commander Russell," he said, his voice deep and resonant, "I'm Admiral Blake. I have something to discuss with you, something that couldn't be shared in the debriefing." Ethan straightened, a flicker of curiosity breaking through his malaise. "What is it, sir?" Blake hesitated, as if weighing his words. "Our analysts have been going through the data you brought back, and they found something extraordinary." He tapped a command into his wrist unit, and a hologram bloomed to life between them. It showed a double helix of DNA, certain sections glowing brightly. "This," Blake said, pointing to the glowing areas, "is the genetic mutation that gives you your abilities. Your strength, your speed, your invincibility. We always thought it was a natural mutation, but it's not. It was engineered." Ethan stared at the slowly rotating helix, his mind racing. Engineered by who? "By an ancient civilization we call the progenitors." Blake swiped, and the image changed to a star map, certain systems pulsing red. They ruled the galaxy eons ago, before vanishing without a trace, but they left behind ruins, scattered across the stars. And now, thanks to the Kradox data, we know why. He met Ethan's eyes, his gaze intense. "The progenitors created humans, Commander, created us to be weapons in their wars. The Kradox have been searching for the secret of our origins for millennia, and now, with this data, they may finally have the key." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. His entire life, his very existence, had been shaped by this mutation. To learn that it was not a quirk of nature, but a deliberate design, it shook him to his core. "There's more," Blake said. "We need you for a mission, Commander, to journey to the progenitor ruins and find any technology or knowledge that might give us an edge. You're the only one who can do this." Ethan recoiled, shaking his head. I can't. Not after what just happened. I'm not ready." "None of us are ever ready," a soft voice said. Natasha stepped into the room, her eyes locking with Ethan's. "But this is bigger than us," she continued. "This is about the fate of our species. And it's also about you, Ethan. This is your chance to understand who you are, why you were made this way." She laid a hand on his arm, her touch gentle but firm. "I'll be with you every step of the way. We'll face this together." Ethan looked from Natasha to Blake, then back to the slowly spinning helix. The weight in his chest seemed to lift, replaced by a new sense of purpose. He straightened, squaring his shoulders. "All right," he said, his voice steady. "I'm in. When do we start?" The ship dropped out of warp, the stars snapping back into pinpricks of light. Ahead, a massive gas giant loomed, its swirling clouds of red and gold casting an eerie light over the scene. "There," Natasha said, pointing to a small moon orbiting the giant. "That's where the progenitor signal is coming from." Ethan angled the ship towards the moon, his eyes scanning the readouts. The surface was barren and airless, pockmarked with craters. But as they drew closer, he saw something else. towering spires of metal glinting in the light of the gas giant. "Looks like we found our ruins," he murmured. They set down on the outskirts of the alien city, the ship's thrusters kicking up plumes of ancient dust. As they stepped out onto the surface, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. "Stay sharp," he said, unholstering his plasma rifle. "We don't know what might be lurking here." They picked their way through the ruins, their footsteps ringing on the metal walkways. The buildings towered over them, their surfaces etched with strange glyphs and geometries. "I don't know," Ethan replied, "but I get the feeling it wasn't just a city. Look at the scale of it, the technology. This was something more." As they rounded a corner, they came face to face with a towering construct of gleaming metal and pulsing lights. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but with multiple arms and a featureless, glowing faceplate. "Intruders," it droned, its voice echoing metallically. "You are trespassing on progenitor territory. Prepare to be eliminated." The construct raised its arms, energy weapons unfolding from its wrists. Ethan and Natasha dove for cover as searing beams of light scorched the ground where they'd been standing. Ethan returned fire, his plasma bolt splashing harmlessly off the construct's armor. Natasha flanked it, her electro-staff sparking as she jabbed at its joints, seeking a weakness. The battle was fierce, the air filled with the scream of energy weapons and the clash of metal on metal. But finally, with a well-placed shot from Ethan's rifle and a devastating strike from Natasha's staff, the construct toppled, its lights flickering and dying. Ethan helped Natasha to her feet, both of them breathing hard. "I guess the progenitors left some surprises behind," he said, eyeing the fallen construct warily. "And I bet there's more where that came from," Natasha replied, dusting herself off. "We need to be careful." They pressed on, deeper into the ruins, battling more constructs and overcoming ancient traps and defenses. As they fought side by side, Ethan felt a bond growing between them, a sense of shared purpose and understanding. In the moments of rest they talked, about their pasts, their hopes, their fears. Natasha spoke of her childhood in the slums of a frontier colony, of how she'd clawed her way up to become one of Earth's top agents. Ethan found himself opening up about his own past, about the mission that had gone wrong, the friends he'd lost, the guilt that still haunted him. "It wasn't your fault," Natasha said softly, her hand on his shoulder. "You did everything you could." "Did I?" Ethan asked, his voice raw. "Sometimes I wonder." "That's what makes you human," Natasha replied. "That's what makes you more than just a weapon. You care, Ethan, you feel. That's your true strength." As they delved deeper into the heart of the ruins, following the trail of ancient clues, Ethan felt a sense of anticipation building. They were close. He could feel it. Close to the answers he'd been seeking his whole life. But they weren't the only ones on the hunt. As they entered a vast vaulted chamber, the sound of thrusters echoed from above. Ethan looked up to see a squadron of Kradox strike ships descending, their weapons already glowing with charge. At their head was a figure Ethan recognized all too well, Commander Zaxxon, the Kradox who had nearly captured him on the Kradox homeworld. Zaxxon's eyes blazed with hatred as he locked gazes with Ethan. "Oh, you cost me everything, human," Zaxxon snarled, his voice dripping with venom. "My rank, my honor, my brother's life. Now, I will take everything from you in return." The Kradox ships opened fire, and the chamber erupted into chaos. Ethan and Natasha dove for cover, plasma bolts sizzling overhead. They returned fire, their weapons seeming pitiful against the onslaught. "We need a plan," Natasha shouted over the din of battle. Ethan's eyes darted around the chamber, searching for anything they could use. His gaze fell on a towering progenitor machine in the center of the room, its surface covered in glowing glyphs. "There," he yelled, pointing. "That's what we came for. We need to get to it." Ethan gritted his teeth, a desperate plan forming in his mind. He met Natasha's eyes, saw the understanding there. With a roar of defiance, Ethan burst from cover, charging towards the progenitor machine. Plasma bolts rained down around him, searing his skin, but he pushed forward, his invincibility holding against the onslaught. Zaxxon saw him coming, his eyes widening in shock and rage. He swung his ship around, bringing its weapons to bear, but Ethan was faster. He leapt, his enhanced muscles propelling him high into the air, and landed on the nose of Zaxxon's ship. The Craddock's commander snarled, wrenching his controls, trying to shake Ethan off. But Ethan held on, his fingers digging into the metal hull. With a grunt of effort, he ripped open the cockpit canopy and dragged Zaxxon out, hurling him to the ground below. The Craddock ship, now pilotless, spiraled out of control, crashing into the wall of the chamber in a ball of flame. Ethan rode the shockwave, landing hard but unharmed next to the progenitor machine. Natasha was there, her electrostaff crackling as she fended off the remaining Craddock soldiers. "Hurry!" she shouted. "Do it!" Ethan placed his hand on the glowing glyphs, feeling a surge of energy coursing through him. The machine thrummed to life, ancient mechanisms grinding into motion. A beam of brilliant light shot out from its apex, piercing the roof of the chamber and extending into the sky above. And then Ethan's world dissolved into a blaze of white. Now the light enveloped Ethan, its brilliance blinding. He felt a strange sensation, as if his body was dissolving into pure energy. The world around him faded away, replaced by an endless expanse of white. As his vision cleared, Ethan found himself in a realm unlike anything he had ever seen. The ground beneath his feet was a shimmering, translucent surface that rippled with each step. The sky above was a kaleidoscope of colors, swirling and shifting in hypnotic patterns. And before him stood a being of pure energy, its form constantly shifting and pulsing. It spoke, its voice resonating through Ethan's mind. "Ethan Russell," it said, each word a tangible force. "We have waited long for this moment." Ethan stared in awe, struggling to comprehend. What are you?" "I am a remnant of those you call the progenitors, an artificial intelligence left behind to guide our greatest creation, humanity." The being's form shifted, coalescing into a humanoid shape. It reached out, and Ethan felt a flood of information pouring into his mind. He saw the history of the progenitors, a vast and ancient civilization that had once spanned the galaxy. He saw their triumphs and their tragedies, their rise and their fall. And he saw the true purpose behind his own existence. "You were created to be more than just a weapon, Ethan," the AI said. "The progenitors saw in humanity the potential for greatness. They engineered you to be invincible, yes, but not just to physical harm. They made you resistant to the corrupting influences of power, of greed, of the baser instincts that had led to their own downfall." Ethan felt a wave of emotion wash over him. His entire life he had thought of himself as a soldier, a warrior. But this was a higher calling. "You have a choice, Ethan," the AI continued. "You can use your gifts to dominate, to conquer as the Craddocks and others fear, or you can use them to protect, to unite, to be a beacon of hope in a troubled galaxy." The AI's form began to flicker and fade. "The path is yours to choose, but know that the fate of billions rests on your decision." With a final pulse of light, the AI vanished. Ethan blinked and found himself back in the progenitor lab, the echoes of energy still crackling around him. And there, standing over him with a weapon raised, was the Craddock's commander. But Ethan felt different. The power within him, which he had always seen as a tool for destruction, now felt like something more, a responsibility, a duty. He rose to his feet, facing the Craddock's commander. The alien snarled, its finger tightening on the trigger. But Ethan was faster. He moved with a speed and grace he had never known, sidestepping the blast and closing the distance in an instant. His hand shot out, gripping the commander's wrist, applying just enough pressure to make it drop the weapon. The Craddock struck at him, a blow that could have shattered stone. But Ethan caught the fist in his palm, his invincibility absorbing the impact. He looked into the commander's eyes and saw not just anger but fear. "I don't want to fight you," Ethan said, his voice calm. "I don't want to fight anyone, not anymore." The Craddock struggled, but Ethan's grip was unbreakable. This war, this conflict, but it's pointless. We're all just pawns in a game we don't understand. He released the commander, stepping back. The Kradox stared at him, confusion and wariness in its eyes. Go, Ethan said. Tell your people what you saw here. Tell them that the age of war is over. The Kradox hesitated, then turned and fled, disappearing into the ruins. Ethan let out a breath, feeling a weight lift from his shoulders. Ethan! Natasha's voice echoed through the ruins. Ethan, where are you? He turned, seeing her running towards him, her face etched with worry. He caught her in his arms, holding her close. I'm here, he whispered, and I know what we have to do. Together they searched the lab, uncovering secrets that had lain hidden for millennia. And there, in the heart of the complex, they found it, a device that thrummed with an inner light, a technology beyond anything they had ever seen. This is it, Natasha breathed. This could end the war, it could change everything. But as Ethan looked at the device, he realized the truth. To activate it, to unleash its power, would require a sacrifice, a life given willingly. He looked at Natasha, seeing the realization dawn in her eyes. Ethan, no. But he was already moving, his hand reaching for the control panel. It has to be me, he said softly. This is my purpose. This is why I was made. He turned back to the device, his finger hovering over the final button. He took a deep breath, preparing himself for the end. An explosion rocked Ethan and Natasha's ship as they shot out of warp space, the blue-green orb of Earth looming ahead. But between them and home lurked a massive Kradox fleet, a wall of bristling guns and gleaming hulls. They've been waiting for us, Natasha said grimly, her hands flying over the controls. They want the progenitor device. Ethan's jaw tightened as he strapped into the pilot's seat, his wounds from the palace battle still raw. They're not getting it. He pushed the throttle to full, their ship leaping forward. Immediately the Kradox opened fire, space lit with searing beams. Ethan jinked and rolled, drawing their attention. Earth Command, this is Commander Russell, he barked into the comm, requesting immediate reinforcements. The response was instant. A squadron of Earth fighters dropped out of warp, followed by a flotilla of Una's warships. They engaged the Kradox, laser fire crisscrossing the void. Ethan wove through the battle, his flying skills pushed to their limits. He targeted the Kradox ship's weak points with precision shots, each blast a testament to his newfound understanding of his abilities. But something was wrong. The Kradox weapons were hitting harder, piercing his ship's enhanced defenses. A shot slammed into the hull, alarms blaring. They've adapted their weapons, Natasha shouted over the chaos. Your invincibility, so it's not working. Ethan felt a searing pain and looked down to see blood soaking his flight suit. The Kradox had reverse-engineered the anti-human weapon. Another hit rocked the ship, sending them spinning. Ethan fought for control, his vision blurring. Natasha dragged him from the pilot's seat, her face inches from his. Ethan, the device, you have to use it. He shook his head, struggling to stand. No, too risky, don't know what it'll do. Ethan staggered to the airlock, every step an agony. He looked back at Natasha, memorizing her face. Get to the escape pod, survive, that's an order. He arrowed towards the Kradox flagship, even as every ship turned their guns on him. Energy beams sliced past, searing his flesh. His genetic enhancements were useless now. Pain beyond pain racked his body as he slammed into the flagship's hull, his fist punching through metal. He dragged himself inside, leaving a trail of blood. On the bridge, he faced a sea of shocked Kradox faces. He held up the device, his breath ragged. This ends now, he snarled. An energy wave burst from Ethan, washing over the Kradox fleet. It passed through hulls, through flesh, rewriting the very essence of what they were. Ethan felt his life force draining away, channeled into the device. But through the pain he sensed the change taking hold. The Kradox aggression, their need for war. It was being stripped away, replaced with understanding, with peace. With a final shuddering breath, Ethan let go. The device went dark, its purpose fulfilled. and as the light in his eyes faded, he saw the Kradox ships beginning to transform, their forms shifting into something new, something beautiful. His last thought was of Natasha, and the future he'd given everything to create. From her escape pod, Natasha watched in awe as the Kradox fleet changed, their ships blossoming like flowers. Tears streamed down her face as she saw a single, still figure drifting among them. Ethan had done it. He had brought peace at the cost of everything. The galaxy would never be the same. And neither would she. Natasha's escape pod drifted through the debris field, the remnants of the Kradox fleet transformed into something unrecognizable. Her eyes were fixed on the spot where Ethan had been, now just an empty expanse of stars. Tears floated in the zero gravity, glittering in the dim light. A rescue ship locked onto her pod, pulling her into its hangar. As the airlock hissed open, she was greeted by a sea of solemn faces, Earth and Una's soldiers, united in their grief and triumph. They helped her out, their hands gentle, their words of comfort falling on deaf ears. All she could hear was the echo of Ethan's final words. The memorial service for Ethan was a grand affair, attended by dignitaries from across the galaxy. His name was etched into the Wall of Heroes, his sacrifice celebrated in speeches and songs. But for Natasha, it was a hollow spectacle. They couldn't understand, couldn't know the depth of what had been lost. In the weeks that followed, Natasha withdrew into herself. She wandered the halls of the Earth Defense Force headquarters like a ghost, avoiding the sympathetic looks and whispered condolences. She spent hours in the training simulators, pushing herself to the brink of exhaustion, trying to outrun the pain. It was during one of these sessions that Admiral Blake found her. He watched from the observation deck as she tore through simulated enemies, her movements precise, lethal, and desperate. "Agent Romanoff," he called as she exited the simulator, sweat dripping from her brow. "A word, please." In his office, Blake leaned forward, his eyes serious. "I know you're hurting, Natasha. We all are. But I have something that I think might help." He slid a datapad across the desk. "Our analysts have been studying the data from the progenitor device. It seems it was just one part of a larger network, a series of artifacts scattered across the galaxy, each with incredible potential." Natasha scrolled through the data, her eyes widening. "What are you proposing, sir?" "A task force," Blake said, "to secure these artifacts before anyone else can. We can't let this technology fall into the wrong hands." Natasha hesitated, the weight of the responsibility settling on her shoulders. But then she thought of Ethan, of his unwavering dedication to doing what was right. "I'll do it," she said, her voice steady for the first time in weeks, "for Ethan." The task force came together quickly, a mix of Earth and Una's soldiers, scientists and specialists. Some were old friends of Ethan's, others were new recruits drawn by the chance to make a difference. They gathered in the hangar, a motley crew united by a single purpose. Natasha stood before them, her grief tempered by a new resolve. "Our mission is simple," she said, her voice carrying across the assembled team. "We find these artifacts and we secure them, for the safety of the galaxy and in memory of those we've lost." But as they set out into the stars, they were unaware of the eyes watching them from the shadows. Across the galaxy, in secret bases and hidden strongholds, a new enemy was stirring. Made up of rogue factions from Earth, Unas, and even the transformed Kradox, they too sought the power of the progenitors. And they would stop at nothing to claim it for themselves. The race had begun, a desperate struggle not just for the future of the galaxy, but for the very soul of all who inhabited it. Natasha and her team were the first line of defense, the thin line standing between order and chaos. It was a burden they would bear no matter the cost, for in the end, as Ethan had shown, there was no price too high for the sake of peace. In the cold depths of space, Natasha stood before the holographic display, the map of the galaxy rotating slowly. Each pinprick of light represented a potential lead, a whisper of progenitor technology waiting to be uncovered. Beside her, Lieutenant Malik, her second-in-command, studied the data. Where do we start? He asked, his brow furrowed. Natasha enlarged a section of the map, a cluster of systems on the fringes of Una's space. Here, she said, pointing to a small, unremarkable planet. Ethan once told me about a mission he ran there years ago. He said there were ruins, unlike anything he'd ever seen. She turned to her team, her eyes hard. Gear up, we're going in. The planet was a desolate wasteland, its surface scoured by centuries of solar winds. The team moved through the ruins, their suits' environmental systems struggling against the harsh conditions. In the heart of the ancient city, they found it, a vault, sealed tight against the ravages of time. Natasha ran her hand over the intricate carvings, a sense of reverence washing over her. "This is it," she breathed, "the first piece of the puzzle." But as they prepared to open the vault, a shot rang out. Malik fell, his suit's alarms blaring. Natasha spun, her weapon raised, to see a group of figures emerging from the ruins. They were a patchwork of different species and factions, united only by the symbol emblazoned on their armor, a twisted version of the progenitor glyph. "Step away from the vault," their leader called, his voice distorted by his helmet. "The artifacts are ours." Natasha's team formed up around her, weapons bristling. "Not a chance," she growled. And with that, the battle was joined. Energy weapons flashed, explosions rocking the ancient structures. Natasha moved through the chaos, her focus absolute, her aim true. One by one, the enemy fell. But they were relentless, driven by a fervor that bordered on madness. For each one that fell, two more seemed to take their place. Natasha fought her way to the vault, her team holding the line. With a final effort, she wrenched it open, revealing a small glowing orb. She seized it, just as a searing pain tore through her shoulder. She turned to see the enemy leader, his weapon smoking. "You have no idea what you're dealing with," he hissed. Natasha smiled grimly, even as her blood pooled on the ancient stone. "Neither do you." With a final burst of fire from her team, the enemy was driven back. They retreated into the ruins, their prize lost. But as Natasha clutched the orb, her vision blurring, she knew this was only the beginning. The war for the progenitor legacy had just begun. And she would fight it to her last breath. For Ethan, for the galaxy, for hope. As the medic tended to Natasha's wound, she turned the orb over in her hands. It was warm to the touch, pulsing with an inner light. Around her, her team secured the site, setting up defenses and scanning for any further threats. Malik, his own injury bandaged, limped over. "What is it?" he asked, nodding to the orb. "I'm not sure," Natasha admitted. "But whatever it is, it's worth fighting for." She stood, wincing at the pain in her shoulder. "Get this back to the ship. I want a full analysis, top priority." As Malik hurried off, Natasha looked out over the ruins. The enemy had been driven back, but she knew they wouldn't give up so easily. They had tasted the power of the progenitors, and they would be back for more. This was her mission now, her purpose. In the memory of Ethan and for the future he had dreamed of, she would not fail. Natasha's team had barely left the planet's atmosphere when the alarm started blaring. The ship shuddered as an energy blast slammed into its shields. "Report!" Natasha barked, striding onto the bridge. "It's them," the pilot said, her hands flying over the controls. "The rogues, they must have had a ship waiting in orbit." On the viewscreen, a sleek black vessel loomed, its weapons glowing with menacing light. Natasha recognized the design, a prototype stealth frigate stolen from an Earth dry dock a year ago. "Evasive maneuvers," she ordered. "Get us out of here." But the frigate was fast, matching their every move. Its weapons tore at their shields, each hit shaking the ship to its core. In the medical bay, Malik struggled to his feet. "I need to get to the engine room," he said through gritted teeth. "Give them everything we've got." Natasha nodded, helping him to the door. "Go, I'll hold them off." She raced to the weapons console, her hands dancing over the controls. The ship's guns roared to life, lancing out at the frigate. For a moment, it seemed they might break free. Then a final devastating blow. The frigate's beam pierced their shields, slamming into the hull. Explosions rocked the ship, consoles sparking and shattering. In the engine room, Malik hauled himself to the main reactor, warning lights flashing red. He knew what he had to do. With a final effort, he plunged his hand into the reactor core, his scream lost in the roar of the overloading engines. On the bridge, Natasha watched in horror as the frigate lined up for a final shot. But just as it fired, a massive explosion tore through their own ship. The reactor, overloaded by Malik's sacrifice, detonated in a blinding flash. The shockwave slammed into the frigate, sending it tumbling away, its systems failing. But Natasha had no time to celebrate. Her own ship was tearing itself apart, the hull breaching, the air rushing out into the void. She made it to an escape pod just as the ship shattered, the pieces spinning away into the darkness. As the pod ejected, she caught a final glimpse of the frigate, dead in space. For now. She knew the rogues would not stop. They would regroup, rebuild, and come for her again, and she would be ready. For this was only the first battle in a war that would span the stars, a war for the legacy of the progenitors and the future of all life. A war that she would fight to the bitter end, for Ethan, for Malik, for all those who had given their lives in the name of hope. The escape pod drifted through the debris field, the remnants of Natasha's ship and the rogue frigate mingling in the void. Inside, Natasha tended to her wounds, her mind racing. The rogues were more powerful than she had anticipated, their resources vast, and they were willing to pay any price, sacrifice any number of their own, to get what they wanted. She looked down at the orb, its soft glow illuminating her face. What secrets did it hold? What power? She checked the pod's systems, hoping for some scrap of good news, but the long-range communicator was fried, the navigation system barely functioning. She was alone, adrift in the vastness of space. But Natasha Romanoff had never been one to give up easily. She set to work, her hands moving with a sure precision born of years of training and experience. She cannibalized parts from the pod's less essential systems, jerry-rigging a makeshift beacon. It was a long shot, but if there were any friendly ships in range, they might just pick up her signal. Hours turned into days as she worked, rationing her food and water, ignoring the pain of her injuries. She lost herself in the task, focusing on each wire, each circuit, each tiny victory against the unfeeling void. And then on the fourth day, a miracle. The pod's sensors picked up a ship approaching fast. Natasha held her breath, hoping against hope. The comm crackled to life. "Agent Romanoff, this is the UES Valiant. We're here to bring you home." Tears of relief streamed down Natasha's face as the rescue ship loomed into view. As the airlock cycled and the door hissed open, she was greeted by a familiar face. But even as she was led to the med bay, even as the doctors fussed over her wounds and the analysts pored over the orb, Natasha's mind was already racing ahead. This was only the beginning. The rogues were still out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. But she would be ready for them, she and what remained of her team and whoever else she could rally to her cause. For this was a fight that went beyond any one person, any one world. This was a fight for the very soul of the galaxy. And it was a fight she intended to win. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.